I came from a generation of people with extended techniques where they became their private vocabularies, and you didn't want to show it to anyone, and it would be just about sound. Well, at a certain point, that's pretty limited, and eventually I wanted to connect it to a larger musical. We have hundreds of years of musical culture, harmony, rhythm, timbre, melody, and you want to connect it with me. I wanted to connect myself with musical universals.
It is such a pleasure to bring you today's episode featuring Mark Dresser. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrabass Conversations, and we are chatting today with the Grammy-nominated bass player, improviser, composer, interdisciplinary collaborator, Mark Dresser. And it was such a pleasure to get a chance to spend some time with Mark in San Diego. I got to hang out with Mark in Tijuana, Mexico for Andres Martin's Latin American Double Bass Festival. And on the way back, I got to spend a couple hours with Mark, watch him teach a lesson, and then we dug into some of what Mark is up to right now and what he's been doing in terms of telematic performance and bitones and some of the projects that Mark has coming up in the near future. Such an amazing artist. What a fantastic sound world Mark explores, and I know you're going to love this conversation. We've got some great sponsors for this episode. I'd like to thank Upton Bass String Instrument Company and Robertson & Sons Violins. We'll hear more from them later, and be sure to check out everything that Mark is up to and has done in his remarkable career at mark-dresser.com. You're also going to hear a couple of excerpts from Mark's album On Veil. You'll be hearing On Veil, and at the end of the episode, Clavis. And these are explorations of the back lengths of the string. Mark and I dig into the details of amplification for this and what he's exploring. So without further ado, from Mark's University of California, San Diego double bass studio, here is my conversation with the great Mark Dresser. It might be interesting because we were talking even in the elevator about your sabbatical in Tijuana and like what you were exploring. Can we start just by talking about like what you hope to get out of the sabbatical and what you did with that time?
I had some areas that I've been working on for years, but I really wanted to get it to the next level. Yeah. So there are two or three things. There was this area of bitones where you do hammer-ons, and then you hear what the backside of the string is. I've got microphones built into my fingerboard, so I can amplify that. So I have magnetic pickups built into the nut and also at the octave. And so that means like any single string can become three sounding pitches, which is a lot to organize. So like it becomes where you have more than one fundamental if they're not going on, so I was spending a lot of time trying to really wrap one bitone is easy to do and think about one, but when you have more than one on a string, you have the length of the string from the nut to the left hand where it stops, the length in the middle, and the length at the part from the finger to the bridge. Mm-hmm. So which ones, do you have one or two fundamentals? I was just trying to figure out how to organize it. So there's a very brilliant composer in Puglia named Giorgio Netti, and he had written a very interesting bass piece for a wonderful Italian bass player who lives in Amsterdam named Dario Calderone. And I think that the piece was called Ur. And it was completely rigorous. I knew him from a saxophonist who I had performed with named Marcus Weiss, a Swiss guy, and he had played this insane piece for multiphonics, and it had like 3,000 multiphonics. And it was like one of the most obsessive things, but it sounded good. That was the thing. And then I was and Marcus said, yeah, I mean, this guy's not just writing, he can play all of these. How it happened, actually, he wrote me asking for a copy of Guts. And I wrote him back, I said, listen, man, I've been knowing about you for years. I'd love to, pick your brain because because I'm at this place, I'm trying to get to the next level. I'm having a hard time actually organizing how to begin to think about it, especially when you have more than one fundamental and it's variable. Right. How do you wrap your mind to organize? He said, well, sure, come visit. So my wife and I, we had a 2-month sabbatical. We spent like 4 days in the Gargano, which is a part of northern Puglia, which was completely beautiful. It was the home to Padre Pio, who was a famous modern-day saint, the modern St. Francis of Assisi. So anyhow, that's a story in of itself. So we hung out there. The first thing I noticed is that he's got his bass. He has a bass in there, like a plywood bass, and he has it like taped, and he knows where every harmonic and and then he immediately shows me some sounds on the bass, things he's working on that not only did I not know about, and I sort of, fancy myself knowing, every extended technique. Not really, but I'm no novice at this. Yeah. Not only did I not know it, I couldn't play it. He's showing me this stuff. Says, "Damn," and then we went. Anyhow, he was completely generous, and we had a wonderful exchange. And anyhow, I trust we'll be long-time friends. And so it was a wonderful, rich few days.
When did you get the idea to start using the pickups in the fingerboard like that?
Well, as a teenager, I mean, I had done these bitones like on a B flat on the G string, and I noticed it was like, you got like a sharp 9 chord, and at the time reminded me of, the Foxy Lady interval.
Right.
and I was a Hendrix freak, and it was, and the expressivity of Hendrix was a real inspiration for me. And then I could hear also, anyhow, so I could talk about Hendrix for a while, and then it was like, so I started playing around with this in my practice room. I was goofing around, and I said, man, this is really cool. But you can't hear it when you play with anyone else. Right. So, but I still kept messing with it. And then in about 1982, I ended up, after living in New York for a couple of years, I moved back to California, and I ended up back at UCSD, where I am now teaching, and I was just trying to finish a bachelor's degree. Essentially, I saw it as buying time to get, to spend time in the woodshed to try to get my skill set together so I could, be able to penetrate the scene, because I desperately wanted to be a creative musician. I had no idea how to do it. And so and I had the opportunity to work, to make a solo recording. This is a tape. So while I was back at school, I met a guitarist named Tom North, wonderful guy, who had on his guitar, he had strapped on to the headstock, he had like a Gibson humbucker pickup.
Okay. Yeah.
So he had it pan stereo. So he had the upper pickups to one side, the normal pickups, and he had it panned. Anyhow, and I had been, as I said, I was working on the solo recording, and I basically was recording this with 2 microphones, and I was getting all these rich tones. And when I heard him, I said, man, I really want to get something like that for the bass. He said, well, steal the idea, take it. I said, well, I'm not a builder, so I found some guy around here, actually, he was a skilled guy named Tim Dowdy, and he built me the first prototype. And it was literally like a P bass, and he made 2 pieces of, 3/4 inch plywood and literally a capo. And then I met Fred Frith years later, who had had a similar setup on his guitar. And he said, yeah, man, Bill Bartolini makes these beautiful pickups. And he recommended I write him. And I wrote Bill, and I told him what I wanted to do. And he knew Fred and respected Fred. And he said, sure, let me work on it. And so I kept bugging him. And a year later, he sent me these pickups. And then and I mounted them. And he wouldn't take any money. You know, it's like when you work with these makers, people who are fascinated with sound for artistic reasons, not just finance. You know, it's a passion that becomes a business.
Yeah.
I've just had the experience time and time again. They respond and want to support that spirit. So he wouldn't take any money. So, and then I had another friend, a beautiful sculptor named Don Jacobson. I knew in New Haven. You know, he's up in Indiana, like up near the Great Lakes. I can't remember the town, but not far from Chicago. And he was a genius sculptor, and he made me this new thing that had, you know, I could change the angle. I was completely. And it was made out of bronze. It looked like a Giacometti sculpture.
Yeah.
And I used that for nearly 20 years. And after a while, things start to wear out, and also it added weight to the bass, though the sound was completely wonderful. And I always used it with a volume pedal because I didn't want it always on.
Right.
You know, I wanted to use it like, not as a gimmick, but as a spice, and try to use it, you know, in a musical way. Because I really see a difference between an instrument and an effect. And I really saw this as being an instrument. And like when I go into any of these sound worlds, I'm trying to make an instrument out of it, not just, I don't need a gimmick.
Yeah.
I just want, what's the musical potential of all these things? So it becomes a process of going deep and trying to find what the musical and emotional context for a vocabulary is. And that can take decades for some things you don't like subharmonics, which I've been playing with since 1980. You know, it's where you can drop. I can through pressure. I can lower a pitch of a fundamental, an octave or an octave fifth. And but you know, it's one of those things. It's not like I don't really find it. It's a wonderful thing. You can you can change the pitch, but it's not a technique that's what I would call organically manipulated. It's kind of on-off. You have to use pressure, and it's there, and the pressure has to remain the same. If you change the speed, it will change it. So there are things that I've gotten from, you know, in between sounds that relate to pressure, that it's opened up all kinds of what I call gradient bowings that have to do with the vertical manipulation of the bow. It's opened up a whole world of multiphonics. So back to the pickups in 2000 or 2002, I was on tour and I played in a concert in Denver, and they didn't have. I brought my bass. That was it, and my friend, a wonderful bass player who I met when I lived in New Haven, named Kent McLagan, who has a degree in engineering from Princeton, I believe, or Stanford. He went from Princeton to Stanford. He's a great bass player, and he's just kind of a brilliant dude. And he was making his own basses, and I said, Kent, you know, I've been wanting to get rid of this. I'd love to have some pickups built into the neck of the bass.
We'll be back in a minute with more of our conversation with Mark, but I would like to thank our sponsors, Upton Bass, and check out their Gary Carr model bass. Their Carr model, it's the only double bass commercially endorsed by Gary Carr. It has a slim, long Carr neck. It's become a favorite for crossover electric players, for jazz players, for roots players, obviously solo classical players as well. It's a bass designed, refined, and enhanced with further input from Gary Carr. UptonBass.com is the website, and thanks for sponsoring the podcast, guys. I would also like to give a shout out to Robertson & Sons Violins. For more than 4 decades, Robertson & Sons has specialized in providing the highest quality stringed instruments and bows to collectors, professional musicians, music educators, and students of all ages. Their modern facility is located in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I was just down there recently, by the way. Fabulous place. It's equipped with 3 instrument showrooms and a beautiful recital hall. It's available to all their clients who are searching for the perfect instrument or bow. Their collection is fantastic. Check them out, robertsonviolins.com. All right, back to our conversation with Mark Dresser. What are some of those things on your laundry list? I like that you'd be interested in exploring.
I mean, I can tell you what's on the immediate laundry list. Sure. I mean, like the immediate laundry list, and I did a septet record that came out in 2015, and I now have the opportunity, both from the foundation and from a record label, to make another one. Mm-hmm. So, and I have a wonderful band, and so I always use I compose any way I can, and so I want to do the next level of what that music's going to be. So that's going to be my main compositional push for the next year. I plan to perform it in June and record it, and I have 3 months of revision, and hopefully record it in September. So that's my hope. That's the next list of and I have solo concert, and I want to have some new pieces for solo in December. So I'm working on some new stuff. So I have some bass envelopes that I'm trying to recharge, to step by step get to, and and I had a residency at the Stone. And I had the opportunity to write for, I had 11 bass players. Let's see if I can remember everyone. I had Rufus Reed, I have Mark Elias, Ratso Harris, Linda O, Lisa Metzacapa, Dave Phillips, Barr's son, Ken Filiano, Thomas Helton from, Jorge Roeder. Okay. Jorge Roeder played anyhow. Forgive me, and myself. So there were 11 bass players. So then it was sort of like, well, okay, I have a limitation. I have 2 hours of rehearsal. I'm going to send everyone everything. So I mapped out all the stuff. I made tapes of what all this extended, the sound world I want to explore, and I just tried to be as efficient as possible to do that. So now I have a bass ensemble here at UCSD. I have an ensemble of 5 really gifted and very different bass players in my graduates, and we're going to play. We have due dates for everyone to have their pieces done by December 8th, and then we have 3 months to prepare towards a concert. So I want to forge ahead with these envelopes that I'm researching now and try to get it into a coherent piece. So, I try to set these little deadlines, and I'd love to do another document like Guts. I don't know if the form is going to be a DVD or, I listened with interest with your interview with Chris Fitzgerald, where he said that, who needs another book? Well, it's interesting. I heard what he's. I relate to that, but a book has value too. Certainly. So as well as. A DVD has value, as well as YouTube. They all. It's just like every mode of communication has its idiomatic advantages. Yes. So, to be able to see something and be able to have something printed out has value. And so I don't know what the format of the next document is going to be, but I definitely by the end of 2018, I want to have that done. So part of the sabbatical, going back to that, was to take this work to the next level. So, I can't plan, much farther ahead than that. So I got two, big projects, and, I always want to leave myself open to, I have a couple cooperative trios, one trio M with Myra Melford and Matt Wilson. I love working with them and composing tunes and, yeah.
Well, in terms of composition, I was, by the way, that 2015 record I've been listening to, like down in Tijuana. That was my the Mark Dresser 7 record.
Yeah.
So I always find it fascinating how people write. I was talking with Andres about this, and he's tried different things. Like, how do you compose these days, and how has that changed over the years? Like, is it from bass to computer, bass to paper, paper to bass?
Any way I can.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. So obviously I play the bass a lot. So if I find a groove that I feel has something for me, I do my best I record it and I transcribe it. And, sometimes I'm inspired by things in life, titles. I collect titles, things that have usually ironic humor to them that sort of give me some juice. Sometimes I have an idea for a textural thing that I'll just sort of map out in my mind and try to consequentially figure out what would follow next. I'll sing. Into a recorder. Of course, I sit down at the piano and try to work out harmonies, and most of all, I find the most useful is to constantly invest in musicianship. When in doubt, start doing ear training and rhythmic perception things, because that pushes the musicianship level. So, I find like musicianship cuts through all the crap, no matter wherever music's going, your ability to perceive pitch and rhythm to begin with is, they're kind of in, that just gives you more clarity. And does that make you less expressive? I don't think so. It gives you makes your blade sharper. Yeah. It gives you a palette. So, I don't think knowledge is a dangerous thing. But I don't worship knowledge either. It's just another tool. And one of my mentors, Ed Harkins, who's a trumpet player, he said the best use of your intellect is to help analyze your intuition, not lead. And I always thought, wow, there's some wisdom to that. And then, there's lots of, I think about, the importance of things I learned from Bert, who was, really stressed artistry and being a musician and not being an instrumentalist, but being an artist. And so you come to the table where that's emphasized at the beginning. That really changes, how you begin to perceive yourself. So to do what I do might seem like an arrogant space, but this is what to become an artist and to find your own music and find your own space. I always felt that's what being a jazz musician, being a musician was. Also, that was a part of the tradition. Find your sound, find your voice, and it's like, and you don't have to find it. It's just there. Just get out of the way. Have enough technique and ideas, and have enough, enough that and flexibility that you can get to what you feel. And then, and if you can't get to it, why? And then, start sharpening this so you can, see what you hear and hear what you see. That was another line from one of my mentors, Jimmy Cheatham, who was a great bass trombonist, composer and arranger, worked with Chico Hamilton. He played with Duke Ellington for a hot minute. Anyhow, he taught here for a while, and he was just a very empowering guy. And anyhow, so I've had a lot of real inspiring people who've given me the green light, saying, affirming that they saw something and giving me, kind of permission to continue. Because it's not like I knew where I was going. It's just like one foot after the other, and, you have a sense about, it's not like I knew what I was, I just had a kind of a intuition that I could sort of smell where this music, what I wanted to do, but I didn't know exactly how to do it. It was just sort of moment, step by step, incremental step by step. And then you work with gifted, inspiring people. You often people who are better than you, you grow. Mm-hmm. So I've been fortunate enough to be in environments like that throughout my life.
Well, it's interesting. There's a young musician named Zach Rowden, bass player out on the East Coast, who he studied with Robert Black for a bit.
Okay.
And I was just chatting with him. He said, people don't realize you really can do whatever you want, and you'll find a way to make that work. I think that's a lesson that a lot of people don't really understand or don't necessarily grasp. And I mean, looking at, your career is not like your typical bass player. I think you could safely say, and just like
but in a way, as you say that, in a way, it has been. I feel like my career has been like a typical American bass player. I started off playing folk music as a kid. I played in rock bands. Mm-hmm. I played in the San Diego Symphony for 2 years. Mm-hmm. I did all kinds of casuals, and I did every kind of gig, but I had this other thing going on, and I met, I was in a band called the Black Music Infinity, and I met Bobby Bradford. This is a band led by Stanley Crouch, who was then a drummer, and Arthur Blythe, James Newton, David Murray. So all of a sudden, I'm like in a hotbed of avant-garde, great black music, and I had a opportunity to imagine something else. What would it be like if you're making up your own music? What are the fundamentals that transcend style? Mm-hmm. So like that was kind of a wild place to listen to to embrace a tradition. So like a tradition is not necessarily a linear thing. And at least in my case, it hasn't been like I went through this and linearly, then I could do this. It was more like jump to what your affinities are and then shore up your musicianship so that you could do things in between. It's that you had filled it up with what you needed. So like, I was playing with David Murray when I was 20, and then by the time I was 24, I was playing with Charles McPherson. Mm-hmm. Like, so if you, in terms of both, that's not saying one's an evolution of the other, but if we talk about, bebop is an older style music than, whatever the music we were involved in that was the music of the day in 1970, 1975, it's a nonlinear path. Mm-hmm. But if you look at it from the aerial view, it looks like, it's actually,
right.
very sequential. So it's like, but I agree with what Zach says, in the sense that, for most of us, unless you're a super genius, no one's asked anyone to become a musician.
Right.
So it's and teaching at a place like UCSD, which is dedicated to, specializes in contemporary music. I have people here who have the appetite to do something that is so rarefied in the culture, especially now. Right. But again, if you have enough drive, skill set, and imagination, you can make your space in the world. And I've seen it for myself. All my colleagues, I see it. Okay, you could say, well, you teach. Well, I was living in New York for 18 years, touring as much as anyone could possibly, tour, and anyhow, it's worked out, and now I still do all those things, but I do teach. Mm-hmm. So I'm not saying that that's the end, because I have colleagues who don't teach, who are full-time freelancers in the creative music scene. But it's there are lots of different lives to be had. There's not one way, but nothing. I've just found out that for myself, and when it's just nothing but your best will get it done. Mm-hmm. I don't know anyone has a career who's not a total workaholic, who's not putting everything and more into it.
Yeah. Yeah, I like the idea of the fundamentals that transcend style.
Yeah,
and I mean, like, emotion is when we were talking earlier about that. Like emotion, like what the gestures or sounds or textures or whatever you explore? Like, what are some of those other fundamentals?
Well, I mean, that was one of the great things that Bert would teach. He said, he says, well, what's the difference between, you find out what a musical phrase is. Does it sing? Does it dance? What do you basic stuff. What is directionality? What is the line? Where does the line move? Does it get more intense, less intense? I mean, those are fundamentals that there are. That's not to say they're not stylistic differences, but right in those simple things, there's a lifetime of and generations of music built into that. From the global, from the aerial view, what directionality is, what power is, what dynamics are. Projecting feeling, sound, energy is an articulation. Is it about a bowing or is it about a sound? Well, it's really about both. But you have to peep what the sound is to really get to the power of it. Of course, you have to have the technique, and you've done wonderful interviews with about that. With Ed Barker, I enjoyed that a lot, and a lot of other people. But those things become really precise ideas of what sound is. Articulations. Does that knowledge make you less creative? No, it gives you more ability to potentially become more articulate. Some people are predominantly interpreters, right? And their relative and their expressive envelope is within what's on the written page. My world is between that, but more often now improvising, and taking that, taking both what I see and hear and be able to connect those things to try to make it seamless.
Do you sit down and improvise within the goal of a composition resulting, or do you sit down with no expectation and sometimes ideas result?
It depends. Like, I'll be at the end of the day, or sometimes, and I'll just, just play how I, what's happening, and then if I, and if I'm lucky, I'm able to tap into something that's bubbling underneath on a feeling level, or an idea that I'm trying to hear, or a rhythmic idea that I'm trying to develop. I'm always trying. I sort of, what's the word? Parse out parameters, because it's very hard for me to hear the whole thing at once. So I'm working on something, some melodic ideas, or I'm working on a harmonic thing that I'm trying to work out, or there's some rhythmic dimensions that I'm trying to work out, and I'll work that out. But when I just sit down, I think the question was when you improvise, right? The question was about having to do with improvise. Sometimes it's with a goal in mind. Sometimes it's not. And, often, especially when you're teaching or you're trying to prepare scores, like I played a piece by Lei Liang, you spend last night and yesterday in Tijuana that he wrote for me, and there were built-in, he had written in cadenzas for me. So, that I was to improvise. So and you feel like, I have this tremendous responsibility to articulate what he wrote, because, he spent a lot of time and I've spent a lot of time. You want to do that. And then you realize, I have to spend, a good amount of time not planning out my improvisation, but looking at that material and say, I got to make something happen here. And, when we did the record, there were every improvisation was different, as it should be. But again, it's sort of like trying to be inspired by just to try to catch the energy of the moment or the music that preceded it, and see how you can grow it, And I think that's not a bad, metaphor of being able just to grow an idea, but, put it, listening to it, following it, see where it goes, and where you can go with it.
Right when we started talking, you were talking about Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah.
And you said, what else inspired you about Jimi Hendrix?
Well, when I heard feedback, it was really clear that was an analog to playing Ponticello.
Okay.
So and also, I was a teenager when he was hitting, and just that was the most, he and Mingus, as a teenager, gave me the green light. And I just think, sort of like, okay, it's about expressivity. It's about, you can express your anger, you can express your sexuality, you can express, music is a safe place to be the full dimensions of whatever you feel. No one's going to get hurt. You're not going to get hurt. I mean, that may or not really be true, but no one's going to really get physically hurt.
Yeah.
But you can say what you want in music, and it's fine. It's a safe place to be the totality of who you are. And he made that really clear. Mingus made that really clear. So that, I had the honor to do a master class with Ray Brown, who I loved and, loved, of course. And I took a master class with John Clayton. We were the same age. We were into it. And as great as Ray Brown was, and I don't have words to express what a tremendous inspiration, both in terms of work ethic and it's also just the profundity of his time and his lines and his work ethic. Mingus spoke to me on an emotional level, and I heard Meditations on Integration or Haitian Fight Song or those things, it's just like, wow. And now music can really have kind of an emotional fire to it. That's what spoke to me, and that's probably why I gravitated towards Lake Coltrane and Albert Ayler and the things that were coming out of the free jazz movement, because it was more expressionistic. And then and I had the opportunity to play to meet Anthony Braxton, and then I ended up playing with him for 9 years after studying in Italy for a couple of years with Franco Petracchi on a Fulbright. So, you just keep growing in all these different directions. So, I just think it, in terms of the path, it's just, I'm keeping working from area to area. Right. Here's a moment to really shore up this. Here's an area to grow in this direction. Here's an opportunity to compose and take it to the next level. And, it's just not linear. And at the same time, the big challenge for all of us in this era is to keep all the balls in the air, right? You look how much you're doing. You're trying to keep, and I say this not you, but I'm trying to still play a C major scale in tune every day because the bass don't care. Right. That's the thing. That's the thing I love and hate about music. The music doesn't care what you've done. It has to be played every day. The bass does not give a damn.
Well, speaking of moments, another moment, a fun moment from this summer for me was in the Francois Rabath recital. You were up there with John Clayton, right? They're all playing together and taking solos and going across, and which was I had such a great time taking that all in. Yeah. And so there's somebody that how did you meet Francois, and what sort of how has he had an effect on your playing?
Well, I became aware of Francois Rabath. I mean, in 1970, I guess I heard baseball.
Sure, right.
And, I was struck with, his virtuosity, but his also spirit and kind of, fearlessness. I just, I loved it immediately, but, this was before the internet. I lost touch with everything about Rabath,
Right.
And then I don't know what year it was, but I think when Paul Elson was teaching at UCLA, I met Paul. We were both on the same plane from LA to somewhere.
Yeah, right.
and I had just done my first solo cassette.
Oh, right. Now we're dating.
Yeah. So this was before I had a CD. I had a cassette, and I gave it to him, and he told me about Francois. And I said, oh, yeah, I remember him. And he told me his journey with him. And I think it was in 2014. It just so when I got started teaching here, I ended up with a bunch of students. I don't know how it happened, but who had gone through Rabath. Mm-hmm. I think I've had, Matt Klein, a brilliant young musician. Kioe Wellington, who just graduated here, got her master's with me. Jordan Morton, who's studying with me now. I'd spent time with Francois, and also had gone through Paul. Mm-hmm. So I think Paul sent people towards me, and then towards me who he felt had the new music bug, and And then so on 2014, so I had like 3 students, and then now Catherine Schulmeister had done as a kid, had gone to the, where the Canadian one was.
Right, yeah, Domaine Forget.
Yeah, so she had done that as a kid. Right. So when I was on sabbatical, I was going to France. I said, I've got to go pay my respects to the great man. So I had to, so I wrote him an email, and he, of course, graciously invited me. It was an amazing sabbatical because I visited with Francois. I went to go visit with a big inspiration to me, Bar Phillips. Mm-hmm. I visited him in the south of France. I went to Rome and hung out with my teacher, Franco Petracchi. Mm-hmm. And then I visited Joelle. We're more or less the same age, but she's a hero and a pioneer in her own right. So it was a really rich time. And so, and then I had to run into Francois at the at the Hawaiian bass convention that Fumiko Wellington, and he had heard me play there, and he was nice. He says, "Yes, you play good. You play different. You play good, but you play different." And it was really funny. And then when I visited him, of course I played. He invited me to play for him, and I was playing his bass. I brought my bow. He said, "Yes, you sound much better than the last time I heard you." He says, "Another 10 years." It was hilarious. It was wonderful, and of course it was true. I hope to be better in 10 years. Anyhow, so and then we hung out together. I taught at Johnny Hamill's Kansas City bass workshop. So yeah, and for me a big thrill was to be able to. The last thing I did before I left Kansas City was we went to Sylvan invited me on Francois'. He asked to, so I recorded with him. Mm-hmm. He was re-recording some of the early pieces. He's 86, so amazing.
Yeah,
great inspiration. Also, just about longevity as an artist, and as and keeping your skill set together, mm-hmm. and also just the joy of sharing.
Hi, Jason. This is Rodrigo. So you asked us in your podcast to share with you how your podcast has helped us. And I have to say your podcast is really, really important to me, at least. It motivates me. It gives me ideas of different things to do. It helps me research different things. Through your podcast, I learned about myelonization, and I learned about other practicing methods and things like that. I think it is instrumental, and it helps me especially with motivation. Like sometimes I don't feel like practicing, and then I listen to one of your old podcasts, and then I find myself motivated again to practice. So just amazing stuff what you're putting out, and I couldn't be more thankful.
That is Rodrigo Rojas. Thank you for calling in and leaving that feedback, Rodrigo. And if you would like to leave any sort of feedback for the show, feedback@contrabassconversations.com will get you in touch with me. I respond to each and every single email. You can also call, and I have this number in the show notes. The number is 415-952-5643. That goes to a Google voicemail, and you can leave a message just like Rodrigo did, or you can connect with us on Facebook. You can leave a voice message through that also. Thank you so much to everybody who writes in. Really appreciate it. And we're back with the final part of our conversation with Mark Dresser. Well, I have to ask, and I know you've talked about it a lot. You're in this university environment now. I know that's something you've experimented and not just experimented, but worked in a lot, is the telematic. Using the internet to the academic and deep tones for peace.
Right.
And I've check that out.
Yeah.
I remember even being on a panel with you at ISB 2009, I think,
Right.
and that was right around when that all was happening.
Right.
So maybe just could you just maybe briefly just talk about what that is and how that's opened up some new possibilities for you?
Okay, so telematics, as we practice it, can be a lot of different things. Is that we perform live with musicians in different geographical locations. So this means that we can play concerts with people in Seoul, Korea, simultaneously with people in New York, or we can play concerts. We did several concerts playing with Zurich and New York and San Diego. So we've done it. I've done as many as 5 locations simultaneously, but more often than not, it's 2 and sometimes 3. So the motivating factor for me to get into this was purely pragmatic, which was, once I left New York and left my initial community of collaborators, I missed them.
Yeah.
And now I'm in Southern California, and of course they're great musicians here, but you have special chemistries and histories are developed over time. So I wanted to play with the people I wanted to play with, and the great composer and pioneer Pauline Oliveras, who I met as a student when I was my first year at UCSD. It was my sophomore year in college. I first met her there, and we had been in touch when I moved to New York. I moved to New York in '86, and then when I got to this job, I forgot how it happened, but I learned about telematics. I learned that she was involved in it, and at the Guelph Festival, we were sitting at a table, and over dinner we were sitting next to Charlie Hayden's Liberation Orchestra, and it reminds me of the modern day version of Big Noise and Winnetka when Bob Haggart writes the tune on the napkin. On a napkin, she broke down what the fundamentals of telematics were, which were it operates on the technical level, the artistic level, and the administrative level. So it takes lots of planning, and it's done with and you have to have a community of people doing it because, there's lots of different expertises. And I had the only thing I could do, the only expertise I went into this, the only expertise I really had is I knew how to collaborate and make things happen with folks, because as a bass player, you do that all the time, and I'm an improviser, so that part was natural to me. The human part of trying to get people interested and involved and to cooperate, maybe I have a little gift at that too. But the technical level and the administrative level, there was a lot to learn. And being at a research university that is, invested in pushing envelopes, the UCSD was completely supportive of it because it was sort of a mandate. It's, distance education. There's lots of things that are related to transcending distance that is potentially has business potential, and of course, everyone's looking for how to make the next thing. Of course, I was not interested in anything but the artistic level and the community level. So I started collaborating. We did a class, and it just with Paulie had a group of students at Troy University. Was it called the Rensselaer Polytechnic University in Troy, New York, and Chris Chafe, who's a cellist and a designer of this platform called Jack Trepp Teaches at Stanford. So together, it just so happened that we had a class, and I had 2 collaborators, a visual artist named Adrian Yannick, and Shirok Yadagari was a sound designer in the theater dance department, and Victoria Petrovich, also a set designer from theater dance. So 3 different departments, 4 faculty collaborating, and we had a group of students from these 3 different areas, and we had an hour a week that we were doing these projects. So it was a 3-hour class, but for an hour a week we were going to work with Pauline and Chris. So we wrote these pieces and we did these concerts, and it began. And through that I met Sarah Weaver, who's been a collaborator since 2009, who's a composer and conductor and deeply deeply invested in telematic, the potentials of telematic art making. So basically, you ask, well, what is the deal? The deal is that we can play, telematics could be many things. It's clearly somewhere between performing live and playing in a recording studio. The live part is that where you're playing at the same point of time. The part that's like the recording studio, we're using close microphones, so we're hearing the details. The part that's also like live, as in playing in a church, you have, depending on the distance, you may have a little bit of latency, and that latency is a kind of digital acoustic. So that becomes, how you deal with acoustics is as a musical problem.
Right.
And a compositional issue. So we've explored that. And also it's an audio-visual medium. Well, I'm a musician. That's not that's not what I'm coming into. But, as the telematic net, as our community has grown, we've connected with, people with video expertise, VJs, for example. My dear friend, the great flutist, Matthias Ziegler, has a team in Zurich. And he and I have been playing together since 1994. Mm-hmm. But he has two video guys who are like pushing the envelope of what we can do. So when we're playing San Diego, they have us mapped. So like when we did a conference here last week, I had a black screen behind me, and I was playing with Michael Desson, great trombone player, collaborator. We were both in here. They had us mapped, and they were playing in a room with a black screen and sheer black, translucent material. So, and we were on either side of him, both Michael I and also Chris Chafe at Stanford. So it felt like we were in we were present in the room. So the video presence becomes better and better. So musically, what's different? Well, musically, we're still essentially playing like we play. I'm looking at telematics as being a transparent medium. It's just sort of like when I talk on the phone, I'm talking what I want to talk. I'm not doing telephone talk.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah.
And sometimes, on the telephone, sometimes you can hear emotion in people's voices that you might not get when you see them in person, right? Because the visual medium and their personality speaks louder than the subtleties of their voice. But when you get on the phone, you don't have that visual confusion, and you hear something else. Anyhow, so telematics has those qualities. So it has the potential of, I found it to be very intimate in a way, even though you're playing 3,000 miles difference. This is what's interesting. You can transcend geography, location, but you can't transcend time zone.
Right.
And that's a real thing.
Yeah.
A concert at 9:00 at night is very different than at noon.
Yeah.
A concert at 7:00 at night is very different than 10:00 in the morning. And what it means, not just to the players, but to an audience. And so you try to, equalize those things out, but they are differences. So anyhow, every time we do a telematic project, we are trying to pick a new envelope of exploration. So we're always trying to bump up our game and trying to learn from it.
Yeah. Oh. It's fascinating.
It's been really, unexpected. Had I stayed in New York, I would have never got into it. It was really the need to connect.
Yeah.
The personal thing, the human thing.
Yeah.
And that's sort of like, that in the end, that seems to be the big thing that moves things forward. It's not, technology is great, but what technology facilitates humanity, hopefully, and good, and hopefully good music. Because in the end, that's what I'm interested in. That
right. Possibilities that opens up.
Yeah.
Even with the limitations, it's really astounding.
And then again, it opens up, but not every experiment isn't a success.
Right.
We've technically had success every time, but, will the music last? Anyhow, you just keep working on it. I'm motivated here to, being in this environment, I'm supported to develop it. So I'm going to, you see my studio now, I'm going to, in the next few months, I'm going to get a screen in here so we can make this, we can do this mapping so we can literally appear in these other spaces. Yeah. So it's not, instead of looking how we've typically performed, you see this, this screen, and we're looking at these boxes and people with different, we're in a black box, they're in a classroom. And it's like at this point, after I'm doing another of this, I hate the way that looks. I want something right. more immersive.
Right.
Even though the music, when you're playing with people that even, shockingly, that transcends latency somehow. I mean, if you're like, we did a project, and I composed to efface the latency. You can embrace or try to efface the latency compositionally. But it's surprising. And so I try to enlarge my community. I start with people I know and who I musically got something going on with.
Mark, thank you so much for chatting. Folks, check him out at mark-dresser.com. He is, of course, double bass faculty at the University of California, San Diego, UCSD, where I got a chance to catch up with him. And I've had the privilege of seeing Mark perform many times in the past. If you have not seen Mark perform, you have to see Mark perform. Such a dynamic player, such a great exploratory spirit, and continuing to explore this amazing instrument of ours and find new ways of creating music with emotional impact. I mean, how cool is that? It's such a pleasure to see Mark perform in Mexico. He and I were at Andres Martin's festival in Tijuana, Mexico, and to see him work with the students and to see the eyes open wide as they see all these sound possibilities they never thought of before. Check out Mark. He's incredibly active. He's got so many fantastic albums, over 140 albums, and I think 30 solo projects in there. So he's doing great things for the instrument, for music in general, and just such an honor and a privilege to sit down and chat with you, Mark. Mark and I actually served on the International Society of Bassists Board of Directors for a period of time, and Mark invited me in 2009 to be a member of a panel for the ISB convention called Music in the Digital Age. I put this out on the podcast back in 2009, and it's got Phil Palumbi, Mark, Douglas Mapp, Frank Proto, and myself. Everybody except Phil now has been on the podcast in a solo episode as well. We'll have to work on that, Phil. But check it out. I've got a link in the show notes. It's a fascinating discussion, and it's just so great to sit down and chat with you, Mark. We definitely need to do a round 2 sometime soon. So that's going to do it for another episode of Contrabass Conversations. Thank you so much for sticking with me. I believe this is episode 426. If you're new to the podcast, we have many episodes in the archives, and a great way to go back and listen to these is with our app. We have a free app for iOS, Android, and Kindle, and if you go to contrabassconversations.com/app, you will find that. Thank you to everybody who writes in, everybody who listens, everybody who follows along and likes this on Facebook and shares this on Facebook and retweets it on Twitter and gives it a heart on Instagram. It means so much to me. If you are active on any of those platforms, go to our website and you can get the link to follow along with us there. Sign up for our email list. We share out valuable content about the double bass, podcast related and otherwise, each and every week. So look forward to seeing you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.